Hi folks, Carl James here with another video from Electric Media Madness and yet another review of Doctor Who Season 12. We've reached episode 6 entitled Praxeus, or as I like to call it, the brief return of Greta Thunberg. Yes folks, just a few episodes later the BBC has come back for another bang on the environmental drum. Thankfully they aren't bashing it quite as loudly as they were in the abomination that was Orphan 55. But before I get into the review, let's jump into a shuffle through the plot. Bit of a convoluted one this week with a story that jumps all over the place at a rate of knots, so you'll forgive me if I streamline the order of events for conciseness and clarity. We start the episode with all kinds of introductions. We have a disgruntled ex-police officer, Jake, in the UK, getting a message from his husband Adam, who is an astronaut supposed to be currently in orbit of Earth, to come and find him. Jake sets off for Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the body of a naval submarine crewman washes up off the coast of Madagascar. The Doctor arrives to pull the body, infected by some type of scaly alien bacteria, out of the sea. The Doctor meets medical researchers Suki and Amaru, who are conveniently nearby. In Peru, we're introduced to video bloggers Gabriella and Jamila. Jamila's attacked by vicious birds and then vanishes. The next morning, whilst looking for Jamila, Gabriella encounters Ryan, who takes her with him to meet up with the Doctor in Madagascar. In Hong Kong, Yaz and Graham encounter Jake at a warehouse filled with alien technology, along with a teleport device. They also find astronaut Adam strapped into an alien machine. He has the same scaly bacteria on him as the body in Madagascar. Two biosuited creatures with energy weapons show up and start shooting at the group as they rescue Adam. The Doctor shows up in the TARDIS and everybody bar Yaz and Gabriella depart for Suki's laboratory in Madagascar. Yaz and Gabriella return to the warehouse to investigate the technology and use the teleport device to travel to an alien-like colony. It's subsequently revealed that the habitat is an artificial shell in the Indian Ocean made of dumped plastic refuse. In Madagascar, the Doctor learns that the scaly bacterium feeds on microplastics, the same microplastics she says saturate living beings on Earth. She also says that the birds' odd behaviour is due to their biology fighting back against the bacteria. The Doctor creates an antidote, but then learns that Suki is an alien scientist working on Earth to cure the bacteria, which she calls Praxeus. Suki teleports away and a swarm of birds attack the lab, killing Amaru. The Doctor and the rest of the group escape in the TARDIS and arrive at Yaz's underwater location. Adam volunteers to be given the antidote. We also learn there are marriage problems between him and Jake. Suki appears in the underwater habitat and the group uncover her spaceship there. Suki is infected with Praxeus and reveals that her world succumbed to the bacteria. She came to a planet rich in plastics, i.e. Earth, to develop a cure. She asks the Doctor for the antidote, but the Doctor says it only works on humans. Suki is consumed by the bacteria and then she dies. Adam begins to recover from the bacteria. Realising that it works, the Doctor decides to launch Suki's ships to spread the antidote into the atmosphere. When the autopilot fails, Adam volunteers to stay on board and pilot the ship. Just before the ship's destruction, the Doctor uses the TARDIS to rescue Adam, the cure is spread, and the Doctor drops all her passengers off on Earth. So superficially, the BBC seems to be going full in with its diversity and inclusion strategy for this episode, appearing to tick all the boxes for their requirements. But the problem here is that in doing so, we have so many introductions and superfluous exposition that it barely leaves enough time to tell the basic story of the episode, such as it is. Getting your representation across on screen is fine, but as I've always maintained, story should never play second fiddle to it. I couldn't help but think whilst watching this that the showrunners could probably have made 2 episodes with all the ideas that they'd crammed into it. Maybe they could have done an environmental story about plastics and Praxeus and whatnot in one episode, then maybe produce another episode telling the story of a doomed astronaut and his breakdown of his marriage to another man. Do a full-on, dedicated, non-preachy, I must add, LGBT representation piece, one that's wholly driven by, say, a doomed love story, something along the lines of Star Trek Deep Space Nine's excellent 4th season story Rejoined. The problem is that media types don't think that way nowadays. It's all, look at this, now look at that, we've got this, then this, look at us, aren't we clever for giving you so much in one episode of television? It's almost a child mentality, really. Kids in a candy store. No restraint, no ability to do things in a paced and measured way, no consideration. And I absolutely think that people would be far more embracing of these shows if the writers and the producers just engaged their brains a little bit and started with the act of, telling a story, rather than beginning with a message to preach and going from there. Speaking of preaching, the Doctor gets yet another of her Agenda 21 lace speeches to deliver in this episode, where she says you're poisoning yourself as well as your planet. Mercifully, it's far more abbreviated and isn't anywhere near as fingers down the blackboard as the one she delivers or bashes the viewer over the head with in Orphan 55. I think it feels less offensive here because it's more about the types of materials used in mass production and recycling, something that most people will agree on, as opposed to the Jackanory style pseudoscientific scaremongering that was employed in Orphan 55. Interestingly though, a wealth of blame here goes on the mass of humanity rather than the industries that create all the refuse in the first place via the material they use to make their products and their packaging. And this is standard BBC rhetoric. Never get to the core of an issue, simply blame everybody else other than those ultimately responsible for it. Other than that, the writers employed a tad of restraint with their environmental message in this episode, at least when compared to the likes of Orphan 55. Make the most of it, folks. I doubt it will ever happen again, or certainly not anytime soon anyway. Speaking of easing off on the standard BBC rhetoric, this episode is surprisingly light on the usual attack of the male, affirming the female programming. That said, we still get a few bits and pieces here and there. Once again, and I'm sure I'm starting to sound like a scratch record here, but it's not my fault, it's the writers of this show, the producers. Graham seems to get the worst of it. At one point, a big deal is made about the fact that Graham doesn't seem to know what a pathogen is. When he's berated about it, he says, "I didn't want to look stupid." Sorry, Graham, but I think that boat's sailed by now. Some pops are also taken at ex-copper Jake, principally in his two-dimensional perception of functioning marital relationships. We even get some dialogue here where he says, I don't do emotion, I'm not good at sticking with things, I wallow in being unreliable, not being honest. Sometimes you really can't figure out the BBC. They go out of their way to place a male, gay, married couple in a show like Doctor Who, a scenario that they could have done so much with in such a positive way, and what do? Well, they make one of the couple an emotionally stunted, unlikable arsehole, basically. It makes you feel like they're doing this sort of thing on purpose, perish the thought. On the flip side of this paradigm, the female affirmation in this episode is also pretty light. The Doctor bigs up Suki a few times because she's a woman scientist, most notably when she says to her, "Wow, you are fast," and "Two brilliant scientists, we can fix this." However, all this seems to be undermined when we learn that Suki's been duplicitous and subsequently she dies. Like I said a moment ago, mixed messages from the BBC. Make up your mind what you want to say, BBC. Is it bad writing? Is it being done on purpose? Or are they just totally inept? Or is it all of those things? I have my own views on that matter, but I'm not going to get into that here. I'll leave that question for you to decide. And that's about it, really. There isn't that much to cover with this episode. I didn't find all that many issues with it either, meaning that I haven't really got a lot to say about it. Were there good things about it? Well, it was brighter than usual, which is always a good thing. For the first time ever in the Chibnall era, I actually noticed the soundtrack here and there as being vaguely tunefully organised rather than the usual mishmash of vague sounds masquerading as music. Putting the whole eco-message and identity politics aside, there was a vaguely coherent story for a change. Lots of potential ideas here, but they weren't really fully formed and far too numerous for one episode. Overall, this episode wasn't awful, but I wouldn't call it memorable either. It was just fair to middling. Like I said earlier, in the right hands, you could have had perhaps two really quite okay episodes here. Instead, we have something with a few spots of potential that just ended up being a bit meh. So it's a tough episode for me to gauge for a score, as I've given one or two episodes 1s and 2s this season. I could say this episode is better than those, but that would perhaps be giving it too much praise. It would be more accurate to say that it isn't as bad as those episodes. With that in mind, I'm giving Praxeus a 3 out of 10. My next Doctor Who review will be the episode Can You Hear Me? Episode 7. Until then, I just want to say thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to click the thumbs up or share the video about if you liked it. Also, if you like the channel, please consider subscribing. I would really truly appreciate it if you can. Thanks again for all your support, and I'll see you again soon.